Alrighty, hello every folks, and good morning. Welcome to the wild and wacky world of the Final Fantasy Tactics sequels that few, if any, played. Now, okay, look, we all know the obvious one. We're gonna get to Tactics Advance and Advance 2 in a moment. Most folks are aware that Tactics Advance existed, and most generally are of the opinion that, oh, it was a stupid little kids game that did, no grown-up stuff. I don't want to go play the Barney game. We'll get to that in a moment, because I think there's a lot more to appreciate there than many will potentially remember, because it's really one of those, like, you revisit it as an adult and you see something completely different experiences. But I wanted to go ahead and start off with one of the greatest kind of games on the PS1 here, that you maybe have never heard of, which was Vagrant Story. Because there was one direct sequel that was headed up by Matsuno himself when it came to a Final Fantasy Tactics sequel. Because they did have a few different iterations of this. They had one that was some hex-based thing. They had one that Matsuno was even talking about today that was some kind of ogre battle-looking thing that, man, looks like it's a beta for Unicorn Overlord when you're going and comparing the different art styles, and God, I wish that existed. But I'll include a link to the Twitter thing if I remember, because he just put that up today. But anyway, so you'll notice that everything from the text to the visuals to everything else looks very familiar here, with the oftentimes seemingly missing noses, though they do make a point to make those noses very prominent in some other cases. But you'll notice that everything seems very familiar because Vagrant Story is, again, a story taking place a good bit after the events of Final Fantasy Tactics. And just like something like Tactics Ogre, it's a case where the world is essentially in a sort of mundane, kind of like roughly 15th century Europe-esque state, where a lot of new technologies are coming about, that they're kind of trying to throw away mysticism in favor of more technology and growth and industrialization and stuff like that. The old magical stuff, probably happened in the background, but most of it's being suppressed and or weaponized by the powers that be. And so in your case, you're playing as that mysterious dude in the background that can't figure out how pants work. That you're essentially a secret agent for the church, give or take. And by secret agent, I just mean you are basically their Terminator. This is a really cool setup for a game. Because while the story does have the old Matsuno politics and everything else, it does have a absolute shitload of stuff going on as far as lore and background and everything else. This setting is really, really cool. In fact, I would argue that the best way to describe Vagrant Story is Matsuno does a Dark Souls like a decade early. The vibes of particular locations, like you're walking through places that feel like Undead Burg, while it's only the sound of your footsteps and weapons and enemy soldiers' armor clanking and stuff like that. That is just incredible as far as mood and sound design and everything else. Everything I loved about the punchiness of FFT is here, with incredible sound design, really cool mechanics, and interestingly enough, this game's also kind of the missing link that many don't see between Final Fantasy Tactics and Tactics Ogre, because you had the original Tactics Ogre, not much going on in terms of mechanics, but a hell of a lot going on in terms of story. Then you have Final Fantasy Tactics bringing in all of those interesting mechanics, but then kind of sticking to a story that does not change. And then you have Vagrant Story that still technically has that story that doesn't change, but mechanically speaking, they go way down the D&D rabbit hole, where they're going like full tabletop mode in a lot of situations. Where you'll notice that every particular enemy has particular weaknesses on their armor to different types of weapon attacks, different elements, different racial types, and what have you. All of your weapons' edges and and hooks and pieces and handles and everything else come into play when it comes to combat and stuff. Man, there's so many more mechanics than it really ever needed, which is really, really darn cool. Additionally, you'll notice that this game is in many ways a prototype in that way. The combat is very much a prototype for Parasite Eve. Later on down the line, we'll actually go ahead and skip past this initial scene because we'll see it again in just a moment, since it's part of the actual intro to the game here. So here we'll go ahead and go to a new game real quick, and then we'll go ahead and load up a further game save file to show you how some of the combat and stuff works. But I want you to appreciate how amazing the cinematography is here. Honestly, I love Metal Gear 1, but dude, this blows it away. This really does blow it away in a lot of cases. But that's the thing. The gameplay in between, basically is a case where you're exploring this decrepit, pretty much undead city, where there's just weird mystical stuff going on all the time. Again, it feels like Metal Gear meets Demon Souls in a lot of cases. Where you are clearly more powerful than everything else here, but oh my goodness, is everything around you a threat anyway? They'll even bring up in cutscenes that your guy is literally stronger than many of the bosses that you end up fighting, but that doesn't mean that you can't be completely freaking murked by the first random enemy that you run into. So yeah, obviously sound design also, I mentioned earlier, sound design is amazing. I love the little clanks behind absolutely everything people do. I love the sound design for absolutely everything in general. It's more punchy than it needs to be, and I'm absolutely here for it. The music is top notch. If you want to have your ears experience something absolutely carnal, go listen to the cathedral theme. That is one of the best area themes I've ever heard in anything ever. And that's actually something you'll notice for a lot of the FFT sequels, that they always put a big emphasis on having great music. Anyway, so yeah, as I mentioned, you're playing this dude. This is just following that scene from before. You've been assigned to go rescue this Duke and/or figure out what the hell everybody was up to. And already there's other factions that are attacking it for their own reasons. There's a guy that's been kidnapped. There's something about a ransom. Not really sure what's going on there. There's this Sydney guy. Nobody's sure what he's about. And you'll notice later, dude's got friggin' robot arms. What's the deal? Anyway, lots of mysteries all over the dang place. But bizarrely enough, if they ever make a remake about this, I think they'll probably do way more with this intro combat-wise. Because as amazing as this is cinematography-wise, there's very little that actually happens combat-wise. You literally have your first boss fight within the first few minutes, and you can't do anything other than basic attacks. It's very kind of FF10 in that particular way. But anyway, such was the style at the time, I suppose. God, I love the sounds of all the doors, all the footsteps, everything's so good! The main reason your guy gets discovered and doesn't just, again, go full stealth mode here is because of some random box that somebody left a little bit too close to some windy tarp. He just needed to yell that it was another cat from the background. Anyway, though, man, they always take the time to personalize every one of these individual units, and that's actually another one of the cool things that we won't necessarily get to show directly in this little preview that we're doing here, but just know that when it comes to the NPCs, every character that you see out in the field does actually interact with world state changes that end up happening, because it's an open world. It's actually a Metroidvania kind of solo dungeon crawler kind of experience from this lens of what would happen if somebody was doing a solo run of Final Fantasy Tactics, right? What if you were a Thunder God Sid type character? What would that be like for you? What does that feel like in this particular context? What is it that we're running into? What kind of stuff do we have to worry about? What are the logistics of how we fight things? And that's what's really freaking cool about this. Because while right now we're just having our basic, again, very FFT-esque combat of just hit dude and hope not to get hit yourself, this expands more and more as you start getting chain abilities on your weapons. You have a sort of rhythm game aspect that ends up coming out. You're essentially able to attack a more or less infinite amount of times, depending entirely on your ability to hit those inputs, as well as your ability to potentially know when and how to take your attacks. Everything's very physical. So, for example, if you're like me and you like using stuff like spears, and you end up using a spear, and let's say you're trying to poke somebody across a statue, and you try to poke through the statue, you're going to bounce right off the thing. Physicality for your weapons is taken into account. If you wanted to, for example, just run ranged weapons, you absolutely can basically turn your crossbow into a machine gun. But again, you're going to incur a large amount of risk while doing so. And what I mean by risk is it's literally a risk mechanic, as in every attack that you do increases your damage, increases your healing, but also multiplies the damage you take and also makes you more likely to miss. It's kind of like a adrenaline overflow meter in a way. But yeah, here's Liquid Snake years before Liquid Snake. There's I think his name's Harden, if I recall correctly. But dude's the guy that's always panicking and letting you know that you're winning. Um, yeah, it is Harden. There we go. So yeah, Mr. Totally not a Skywalker over there. Do you doubt my power? I think this came out before. Did this come out before the prequels? I don't know. So yeah, they're here trying to kidnap a kid, the Duke's kid, from what I understand, for reasons that we don't know quite yet. We don't even know why the church sent their agents, but the church also sent their army, who are opposed to you in this way here. So yeah, pretty much immediately they make a point of him arresting this guy and more or less pulling it off successfully. But remember what I mentioned earlier about all this mystical stuff still exists in this universe, that everybody's fully aware of it being here, that it is controlled to some degree. But again, this is like all the mystical stuff is just something everyone has to deal with. It's not necessarily the end-all, be-all of how everything happens. So yeah, he tries to go make a run for it. He gets shot in the frickin' heart. And, man, I love the music cues and everything. This is why I was going and complaining about War of the Lions so much, like the mobile version. Like, dude, they had those music cues on lock during this era. They had it absolutely perfect in terms of sound design, music design, everything. But, dude, what the hell happened? Anyway, so yeah, he ends up getting knocked down by the dead guy. I want to point out one rare thing that you see here. Did you notice that he leaned down to go check his pulse? Though, again, the kinds of details that matter here. That he actually went to verify that the guy was dead before turning his back on him, and he still came back to life all the same. And once all of that's said and done, what does he end up doing? You know, tries to go and take a fight here. Like, hey, yeah, no, you were dead. You shouldn't be fighting. Like, no, I was supposed to go die and go back to your fairy tales. Like, this dude's got lines all throughout it. Like, you thought Snake had some lines. This dude's got lines. Any darn ways. Yeah, how many moments in a game start off with somebody ripping a friggin' crossbow bolt out of their heart, and yeah, just suddenly having a pet dragon enter the room, you know? Okay, so we haven't really shown much in the way of gameplay, have we? Because there's mostly a lot of cinematography, and it's pretty badass. So we get a wounded dragon as our first boss fight, but as much as I love this theme, the Wyvern battle theme is amazing, and it comes back with a vengeance when you go fight this dude again. Spoilers, despite the fact that he's got a freaking spear through his eyeball. God, turn that mess up, man. God, I love this theme. This theme is amazing. All right. You might have noticed in the background of several videos, there is a reason. Like, it's one of those few games that you can just turn on the intro and just listen to the music. I am going to turn it down in a second, but, you know, we'll get there. Quick sip of coffee. See, oh, whoops. I probably shouldn't be holding the first-person camera button. That's going to mess with some stuff. Also, one of the few things that potentially, if you play it wrong, you can actually get pretty quickly wiped here. The tutorial explains to you right away that, hey, some attacks are going to be able to hit you on multiple body parts, so this dragon can very much kind of ruin your day. But yeah, they immediately introduce you to the limb system here to try and explain how you should be fighting things, like you should be going for his tail and such, and or his neck. But anyway, this is pretty basic stuff right now, just kind of like teaching you to go pick your targets, teaching you to go avoid your attacks, and all of that kind of stuff. So we'll go ahead and skip past this real quick to go load up a... So I forgot that, yeah, when you skip past this, because you can't actually just hit start to skip the entire intro, you get a quote from Dagar, one of many direct references to Final Fantasy Tactics. Okie dokie, so here we are in the game proper. So, alright. You might be surprised, again, that they went from doing the whole FF Tactics thing to suddenly being a dungeon crawler. What's the deal? Okay, so What's the deal is, again, you're basically playing as an FFT character that is now more or less doing the D&D thing of just going off on their own. You're doing a solo run and all of the logistics that come with it. So whether you're looking to create a situation where, let's say, you have to worry about conserving your items because they're limited in this absolute, like, Resident Evil-esque hellscape that you've wound up in, whether you're just trying to preserve your limbs because a boss or something keeps hitting you in the arm and it's going to go reduce the effectiveness of your weapon significantly, or prevent you from casting or something, there's a lot going on here. So, like, again, I believe it's if your head gets broken enough, you can't cast spells anymore, or if your arms get broken, you can't use your weapons properly and stuff like that. And you do have ways to deal with all of it, but you're essentially just kind of free roaming around this whole place, exploring around, trying to make use of the tools that you have on hand to figure out a way out of this whole situation. And it's just, like, it's really, really unique. In fact, you'll notice that there's a lot of spells that came back in other ways. Like, you might have wondered what the deal was with having things like Detect Traps and whatever else in Tactics Ogre PSP. It's because they brought in a lot of the mechanics from this one. So, for example, Fixate, in this case, is used to deal with moving platforms and or other I guess you could say Dead Space-esque moving platform type situations, and so in this case, it's used to stop those platforms from moving. So that's pretty convenient. Even if you fall down a hole, though, you basically just take a little damage and you come back. But that being said, it's worth noting that this is a game that's got so many mechanics out the ears that it's like pretty darn comical. So let's say you go into a new location, right, and you go up here and it's like, okay, there's just a dude up here that's suddenly buffing himself. Do you fight that dude? Do you run away? If you fight that dude, how do you get around his armor? He's got a lot of heavy armor, he's got a lot of heavy weapons. So you've got a limited kind of pool of MP, limited pool of HP and stuff like that. So in this case, let's go ahead and say that he went and buffed himself, so we're going to go ahead and undo that by tarnishing his equipment. So we immediately go into our buffs, we break down his defenses. So we break his equipment, and we know that we can act a little bit faster than he does, because he's going to now give us a debuff to physical strength. You'll notice that for some enemies, they will do stuff like this. There are ways to parry this, I should point out, that you actually can parry just about everything that comes your way, and in fact, a lot of the kind of speedrunning type stuff that happens for this game involves playing it more or less running at negative health and stuff like that. Here, let's go ahead and show some of that real quick. So we're doing complete plink damage. We're just bouncing off his armor in this case. But I'm going to try to get a few chains going just for showing off something. So, like, right there, technically, we died, but we reflected that damage back at him. That kind of stuff also applies if, for example, we were to use the correct parry skill that I forgot I had on the other button, that allows you to recover your health. So, for example, you take damage, but you recover half the damage that was hit. As long as that brings you back up above 0, you end up surviving a hit that would have killed you and stuff like that. So there's a lot of mechanics that end up coming into play for every one of these rooms, and it gets very technical very quickly, to the point that you didn't need a whole team to do anything else, because frankly everything is already just going nutso all the time anyway. Also, I completely lost track of where I was because, well, I accidentally, apparently, did not save it a couple of device switches ago, so I don't really know where this one's at right now. Because I know that in my latest one, I had stuff like Teleport unlocked, I had Heracles unlocked, and I am currently missing those things. So, either way, also I'm pretty sure I had the Iron Key, and every room in here requires the Iron Key. Anyway. So yeah, every room can get pretty intense, every random encounter can potentially see you dead, and all the same, you can just as quickly walk into rooms and start wiping everything that's in there with, good chain attacks and whatever else. This constant build-up of mechanics is really fun. Now, I should probably point out that this may potentially sound like it's a repetitive thing, that you just kind of memorize the route and make it through. But what if I were to tell you that you do pick some things, like, for example, every time that you beat a boss, you get access to a new skill, and those different abilities will allow you to essentially attack and defend in different ways. So like right now, let's say if this chain lands, like you hit it at the right time, and it'll deal the amount of additional damage equal to 70% of whatever you dealt in the first place. So it just allows you to do 170% damage, give or take. But at the same time, I have this one here that goes and absorbs magic on hit, and then another one here called Instill that deals 10% of whatever you dealt, and restores it as PP to your weapon. Now, what the hell is your weapon PP, and why are you going and restoring it? So what you're doing is you're actually adding phantom points to your weapon. Your weapon is inherently racist. Every time you kill something, part of its soul becomes part of that weapon. You become better at killing that particular thing with that particular weapon. I should probably mention at this point that all of your weapons are custom, but we'll get to that in just a second. You'll notice that there's many things here that, again, came back in Tactics Ogre, like Snake Venom, Dulling Impact, and Paralysis Pulse are going to be the 3 ninja moves. Temper is something that only happens here, but something like Raging Ache will essentially do damage based on how much health you've taken. Which I'm actually a little bit surprised now that I think about it, that Rakes went with Agony instead of Raging Ache in the case of that move in When Vision. But anyway. So you've got a lot of different abilities that you get on every level up. You've got a lot of defensive abilities, like let's say Ward here would get rid of paralysis and numbness if you landed the parry correctly. Something like Siphon Soul would add 50% of whatever magic attack hit you back to your MP, or reflecting magic, reflecting damage back, or absorbing damage, which allows you to essentially go and survive a physical hit here. There's a magical version for this as well, or let's say an Impact Guard, which just takes away 50% of that damage. And clever use of all of these little things allow you to very deftly handle bosses. In fact, there's certain bosses that are intended to be beaten using just damage reflection. It really wants you to get clever with your use of all of these different skills and whatnot. So, with that being said, I mentioned that all of your weapons are custom. So if we go over to our equipment here, we'll see that I'm carrying around a few custom weapons, as well as one weapon that I was going to go disassemble for parts. And these are all useful for different situations, because your character is built up as the game goes on, as you'd expect, but it's not the standard leveling situation. Your guy is basically considered max level when you get here, but you get a stat boosting item every time that you beat a boss. And every time that you beat one of those bosses, you go and you use this item for essentially a roulette wheel spin of different stats. To that end, you can actually just save scum it to get whatever the hell you'd like. That is something a lot of people do. And so, for example, there's nothing stopping you, say, like going and getting a stick, getting a good spell casting shield with a good intelligence stat on there, and then immediately walking into a room and nuking everything in there. Going and repeatedly stacking for intelligence and whatnot, equipping wizard robes and whatnot. Just going and cheesing the hell out of that situation by just annihilating everything that ever got in your way, right? So there's a lot of options as far as your builds go, but I mentioned all of your weapons are custom. Everything that you take with you, you can also disassemble. Once you find a workshop, which is why I was looking for teleport earlier, you can actually go ahead and disassemble those things to... Here, let's go ahead and magic this guy real quick, see if we can just do it way easier than we did last time. So let's see, that's going to do 20, that's going to do 31, but have a chance to miss. So we'll just go ahead and Spirit Surge this guy. We might be able to explosion him, but my dude here is no wizard. Again, there's a lot of clever things that you can do to mess with the different mechanics here. I'm not particularly good at them, but again, everybody will have their own preferences and stuff like that. Did not land the right parry, but we might be able to beat him with this stick, because it's funny. Also, I have no idea how the attack timings work on the stick, because I never use it, so there's that. Anyway, we realistically might as well just go ahead and leave this room here before I get completely annihilated again, because like I said, I'm a bit rusty as far as this game goes. But you can get a general sense here for what we're dealing with. This is a very mechanically deep game. There's a lot that's constantly happening. Every room is just its own, completely like it built to very specific standards situation. The way that the sound design is handled is absolutely excellent. The encounter design is a whole lot of fun, and it's really cool to see things like the armor type that a particular unit is using actually playing a part into how much of a threat they might be to you. So, like, let's say you run into a case where, like, you see one knight that you run into, and he's got a lot of heavy plate mail, and he might potentially be weaker to crushing type weapons. So you brought, a heavy warhammer along, or let's say another guy might be weaker to your spear or something like that. In this case, I've got a stick rifle here that should be pretty good at dealing with these undead guys. I don't know if they're classed as demon or undead or what, but we'll go ahead and see if this is good enough. Yep. So we'll go ahead and hit him with this a few times. Again, gonna blame the rusty timing here. Ah, man. Doing real poorly with this today, but I'm hoping this gives you a general idea. Also, I just noticed, I think part of it is actually because I'm trying to look at the screen where this is being sent to instead of the device itself. That might help me out with these timings. It's like right here, we see that this is a really good counter versus this guy over here, so we may only need a couple shots to finish him off, whereas somebody else might need something worse, So, anyway. So as you go on, there are ways to replenish your items by going and fighting enemy units or finding them out in the field or whatnot. Again, there are ways to get drops absolutely everywhere, but every room is going to have its own risks, it's going to have its own rewards, and its own little kind of ecosystem of cool ideas that's going on there. So you're constantly kind of on edge here in a really fun way. And also, one thing I didn't mention as of yet is that the finishers from Tactics Ogre are actually from here. It's probably going to do next to nothing for this guy, because this is a dark type attack. What about Heaven Scorn? Piercing Light. Sounds good to me. Let's see, 57... 63 sounds good to me. So Heaven Scorn, I believe, came back as the final crossbow finisher later. We'll just go ahead and zapify that dude. It wasn't quite the one-shot, but yeah. Anyway, sometimes they're useful. Oftentimes they're a bit of a waste, to be honest. A lot of the finishers are very specific in terms of their usefulness, or break arts, I should say, but they spend health instead of other resources, so they might just be exactly what you need in any given situation. Now, again, this game's just really cool, so if you've never tried it before, please try it. It's just, again, it deserves more love. If they ever do a remake, I don't even know how they're going to do this art style justice. Like, this is one of those ones that if they announced a remaster, I could see it absolutely being a just direct remaster, leave it exactly as it is, maybe explain some of the mechanics a little bit better. Because they do explain them, it's just that the explanations are hard to understand. So, for example, if you go over to your manual and stuff like that, you do get breakdowns of just fucking everything. But there's so many mechanics that it's a little bit hard to understand sometimes. Though I will say, if you're thinking this looks like a very easy game to get lost in, oh, you have no idea. But on the plus side, at least all the names are, all the rooms are given specific names, and they also will tell you exactly what keys every single room needs, so that hopefully when you find those things, you can circle back to those locations and kind of figure your way around and whatnot. But you do have to at least somewhat get to that location in order to get access to those new areas. How did I get to... There we go. It's like, let's say we go to wherever this is, and then we can just go through each individual room and then see what's there. Like, we see that there's a whole bunch of stuff that got caved in during a story event here, so those are only one-way doors now. But every one of them has very kind of Hanging Gardens-esque names. It's Way of Lost Children, the Treaty Room, the Miner's End, the Gambler's Passage, the Revelation Shaft, the Corridor of Shade, the Subtellurian Horrors, Dining in Darkness, Bandit's Hollow. Like, they had the lunatic veins. Like, they had fun with this, dude. Tomb of the Reborn. Oh, man. Hey, look, we had Tactics Ogre Reborn even way back then. So, yeah, Vagrant Story. God-tier game. There was a interview that I was reading about a while ago that was saying that a lot of the kind of later Matsuno projects possibly only came about just because of how good this game was, because a lot of folks at Squeenix were fans of this very niche, very bizarre, but very fun game. Okay. So to that end, I promised that we'd get to the one that that had the most contention of the bunch. So I'll stop sitting here flating Vagrant Story for 5 minutes, and we'll go ahead and check out those other ones real quick. Then we get to Final Fantasy Tactics Advance. In my opinion, by far the most underrated of the Final Fantasy Tactics sequels. Because while Vagrant Story has its legendary reputation at this point, like, I have yet to meet a single person that played Vagrant Story and wasn't at the very least playing it because they were so impressed by the technical stuff going on there, or just completely fell in love with the dang thing. Like, it is a weird game to get used to. Like, I know personally, I've been going around and just exploring around, making tiny incremental bits of progress on that one, chewing on it little bit by little bit for almost a decade now. Again, just having fun every time, but not really quite knowing what was going on. But still, amazing experience. Tactics Advance 2, I've yet to see anyone that actually played Tactics Advance 2, and again, didn't just fall in love with it, just based off of how much good stuff goes on there. But specifically, the original FFTA is contentious in the eyes of many people. Because this game came out a few years later than the Vagrant Story here in 2003, and it attempted to kind of be parallel of Final Fantasy Tactics. In many ways, it was sort of a criticism of itself. A game that has a lot more kind of adult themes in it than it seems from the sort of kiddie appearance from its initial viewing here. Because to the eyes of many, what ends up actually happening here is that, oh, it's just kids' version of Final Fantasy Tactics. Kids have one of them isekai stories where they gotta go in and they get thrown into this new world, and then they gotta, do better than this new world of theirs, and then they leave. But there's more to it. Because despite the fact that this is no longer a Matsuno project, the Tactics Advance games, as I understand, were handled by other folks at Square. But these games do actually have a lot more world building than they get credit for. So to that end, we'll go ahead and get a new game started here, and just kind of explore this a little bit, because it does have the initial kind of trappings of being a sort of kid version of FFT. But there is more subtext that, again, feels like they designed it with the intent that people will come back after they've grown up and given it another look. And to me personally, I've revisited this one multiple times in the last few years, and every time I've just absolutely had a blast. But here's the thing: there's a lot of kind of background to if and when the story might stick for you, and there's a lot of things that might get missed. So, first and foremost, as far as the whole being trapped in a new world thing, I want to point out something, because by the time we get to the end of A2, we know what the book is. They partially explain it in Tactics Advance. They finish explaining it in A2. But the book is not exactly just an alternate world. It is, functionally speaking, a character development prison. Whenever somebody's trapped in there, time isn't going forward, time isn't going backward. They're just basically stuck in this place that they can't leave until they get their shit figured out. And the thing is, in the case of this guy here, when they're going and getting sucked into the book, it's essentially a case where it's 4 different kids all trying to create their sort of perfect world, as it were, not realizing the problems that they're creating for themselves and everyone else around them along the way. So pay attention to some of the stuff that happens in these scenes, because we do get a lot of character development for our main 4 characters. We have our primary trio that we'll see the most of here, and then we'll see some of Marsh's brother down the line. So while we do name him New Kid, because that is the meme for this game, we have 3 main characters that we start off with here. So we've got Marsh. He's effectively your Ramza stand-in for all intents and purposes. Dude knows how to beat the game's plot pretty much immediately, and attempt attempts to do so with almost stubborn recklessness. In the case of Ritz here, we have somebody that's relatively hot-headed, but also more or less is kind of aggressive and hot-headed to hide the fact that they're extremely self-conscious, because they've got some genetic thing that messes with their hair that makes them way cooler than usual. Again, we're gonna ignore that particular detail. I guess that means more overseas or something. Anyway. But that being said, we also have our dude over there, Mute. So Mute's deal is, well, that his whole life is basically falling apart. He doesn't know exactly what to do about it. He's constantly getting bullied. As we'll notice in a little bit, his dad is, functionally speaking, completely falling off the wagon. His mom died, and he is, like, his family's broke. They're in... He's the Kenny of this universe, more or less, except, minus the mom in that case. That of that particular room, he's definitely the Kenny. But that's the thing. He's getting bullied relentlessly. Dude's awkward, and his main wish above everything else is just to get his life in order. In Marsh's case, he's somebody that just moved in. He's basically just trying to fit in, so his main dream in this case is just to be accepted by the people around him. He doesn't seem to be particularly kind of out of place in this particular setting. They don't seem to be bullying him particularly hard or anything, though it is a little bit weird that he decided to show up to winter in shorts, but hey, I guess he moved from Florida or something. And additionally, in Ritz's case, she just wants to be a gamer. That sounds like I'm doing a meme that is basically her shtick, that she just wants to go rack up kills and just kill shit, and that is exactly what she does all game. And when you get in the way of her killing shit, that's when she decides to be your enemy. Anyway, we'll see more of that in just a moment here. So, as before, they continue bullying him because we did absolutely nothing to stop it, and they're going to go ahead and crack his head open with a rock because, of course, kids are going to be kids like that. But again, for anyone that's potentially viewing this from the outside as just like, oh, this is just kiddie stuff, you're missing a lot of the subtle details here, because this isn't just a middle school. Pay attention to where they are and what kind of middle school this is. Because they've got stuff built pretty ramshackle. They've got, essentially, they look like they're in a kind of rougher end of town, as it were. As far as whether anybody's watching them, I mean, their teacher is off doing whatever. He didn't even feel like showing up for quite a while here. They seem to be giving everybody instructions at first, and then the guy just sort of left. So to me, this always gave the vibes of being a sort of inner city kind of school, maybe kind of somewhere inner city Chicago-ish, give or take, seemed to be what they were going for, at least from what I could tell. Like, I've seen schools like this all over Michigan, and it's not the fanciest place. It doesn't mean that there's going to be crazy violence there all the time, but it does mean that finances are going to be a bit stretched thin. So that's going to be our situation here. That we've got Mute here, who's again in terrible financial and familial straits. Dude's thoroughly depressed and trying to hide it. The only form of entertainment that he can afford is to go to a used bookstore. In Marsh's case, he's relatively new here, but we'll notice his whole family's basically living in a one-bedroom house. You might say, wait a minute, she does call from off-screen. We'll get to that in a moment. But either way, it's weird enough that it's a small enough town that everybody knows, hey, it's the Yellow House. And in Ritz's case, again, she probably is the most well-off of the bunch, but potentially is more or less doing a lot more self-inflicted mental harm to herself than anybody's actually doing to her, because I don't think we ever see her actually get bullied for her hair. Anyway, okay, so, yeah, Mute's dad is about to get fired as it goes here. So remember everyone's wishes that we were talking about earlier, that these kids all have particular things that they are hoping to achieve. And everybody else in this world is, well, we'll get to them. Okay, so she's already picking on his dad despite being his friend. That's how you know that they're in a great situation. So he completely missed that his school is even out. There's a pretty decent chance the guy might potentially be an alcoholic or something. We don't know. He is kind of visually, he seems to be portrayed in that particular way. Asks his friends to keep an eye out for him. Either way, stuff's rough. Anyway, so yeah, his whole life completely fell apart when his mom died. And so, to that end, they now go ahead and they're all gonna wait to go check out this cool book that he's got. Ritz, though, I should probably point out, is probably causing more friend loss for herself by whenever she starts talking to people. Just because, like, right here, she's like, oh yeah, I guess your family has its problems, but that kid doesn't even have a dad. Like, dude, his mom died, his dad's, like, barely holding it together. What is your problem? Anyway, so, she's the snarky sort, as it were. And then we get our fourth member of the main cast here, and that's going to be Doned, or Doned. I always called him Doned. Anywho, so yeah, his legs don't work. He's basically bedridden, or just kind of home-ridden at all times. And we see his mom call from off-screen here. Now, I want to point out that as far as their kind of financial situation goes here, we see that they do have some forms of entertainment and whatever else, but we see that... Okay, so, back to it here. Sorry, got a random phone call here, but let's make a few observations about this house. So, the way that they have the roof arcing up top here, this tells me that this is probably going to be a townhouse that they're in. They have the roof arced, but they also have the window arced off to the side, which again, in a lot of downtown townhouses and things like that, you will typically see stuff that's a bit more like that. So I think more than likely the actual layout of this place is probably their mom's bedroom downstairs, their kitchen downstairs, and then this is kind of their living room / bedroom type situation, which I've seen a lot of families use. And I say this primarily because they've got the old bunny ear TV going on here. And realistically, that thing would have been a pain to lug around, but if this was their main living room, well, that could work out just fine. But specifically, I would say it's a two-story thing because, again, with that arced roof situation, it's going to be... It's going to be typically something seen on a second-story house. Sorry, old real estate habits coming in. Okay, so actual story bits now. So we get into the book here, and so they start reading about this book, and they start reading about these other races and things, and swords and monsters and whatnot, and notice all of the things that they mention as this goes on. Where you'll notice that Rich mentions that she's a gamer. She wants to go just kill shit and go collect loot and whatever else. And her group that she ends up joining up with is essentially just that they're traveling along. They're basically telling her, hey, look, your hair's super pretty and you fit in with us. Amazing. And then they're running around just killing stuff, taking contracts exclusively to hunt things. In Marsh's case, he would like to have a bit of a father figure, and he would like to fit in, and so he immediately gets a group of soldiers that follow him, and we've got Montblanc as more or less a kind of cool uncle for him to follow. And in the case of Doned, he wishes that he could move around. Well, he ends up actually getting his feet, and he literally just spends the entire game exploring. Like, he basically doesn't interact with you whatsoever for the most part. He asks you not to break their cool world that they made, but again, he doesn't really know the nature of what they're doing here. And then we've got Mute, who's got the most trauma of the bunch, and what he's essentially saying is that he wishes that it was, like Final Fantasy or whatever. So that's where they get the Final Fantasy stuff, but additionally, you'll notice that every member of his family is essentially put into a position that he wishes to be true. So his more or less falling apart dad becomes a prestigious and confident judge. His mom comes back from the dead, but that's the next thing. That's actually one of those cool little introductions to, believe it or not, the permadeath system of this game. Now, you might say, wait a minute, there was no permadeath, but this has some of the coolest background lore for the permadeath of any game ever. So here's the deal, right? So again, he has experienced death. He has experienced his mom passing away and his life falling apart before his eyes, being completely helpless to stop it, right? So As a result, how would a child's mind interpret this if they were to accidentally start creating an imaginary world to suck them and their friends into? Because remember that it's only the people that read the book that end up getting sucked into the book. So Doned wishes actually for two things. I forgot about that. He wishes he could use magic. He wishes that he could walk. If I recall correctly, I think he ends up being a spellblade of some variety. Anyway, so to that end, we see that it's not the world that starts transforming around them. It copies their world and essentially creates a sort of, I guess you could say, perfect in their eyes initially bastardization of what they've seen, including the fact that you can actually kill those bullies from the very start, because if you pay attention to their names, you actually get an encounter with 3 zombies that happen to have the same names right around the same time that you get the exercise skill. So yeah, canonically they will have tried to murder their bullies. Anyway, so that being said though, I mentioned that the judges involve the permadeath system. What do I mean by this? So, believe it or not, yes, there is permadeath in this game. It can happen to basically all of your characters. It is a game over if it happens to Marsh. If I recall correctly, I think Montblanc even can be killed. But the thing is, when this world is being created, remember again, it's being created from Mute's head. So what's happening is that it's a world in which death is prevented by the system that his dad controls. As a kid is going and interpreting things, what do they think people in power do? They're just a child. They think, oh, they're enforcing arbitrary rules all the time. I was told I can't have Snickers. Snickers must be illegal today. I can't have any fun. Being a dad of 3 these days, I can tell you 100% they totally think this. Anyway, so what ends up happening in this world? Every time that you travel to a new place, it takes 1 day, and every day a new rule is introduced. Because, again, he thinks that it is the job of the government here to essentially enforce an arbitrary rule every day. He doesn't understand what's happening, but he knows that there's supposed to be a legal system, and the legal system must be some arbitrary thing he doesn't know. So that's why the laws change randomly every day. But as time goes on, as you start interfering with his plans, the laws start getting more and more ridiculous, to the point that they will start enforcing 3 different things that you can't do in every battle. So it's like, oh, you can't use items, you can't use weapons, you can't be hit by anything today. Like, just random bullshit that starts popping into the list. There are literally fights where it's like, it is illegal for you to be mugged. It's like, oh great, fuck you too. But that's the thing. By the time you get to that point, and I feel like this is one of those things that folks that get mad about the law system forget, you are meant to subvert the laws. You pretty much within, like, I would say like 2 hours or so of the game, by the time that the second law gets introduced, like, you just have one random thing that's banned at the start of the game. By the time you beat your first totem boss, that's when the second law starts being introduced, so now there's 2 things to mess around with. I think you have like 1 or 2 fights, and then you meet Eziel, I think was the guy's name, the anti-law guy. So by that point, up until the end of the game, and post-game, because this game does have a post-game, you have anti-law cards that become a system. Every time that you win a fight, just like it's March of the Black Queen or something, you get cards. And with those cards, you can affect the laws. Whether it's nullifying things to make it so that your personal things are unaffected, whether it's to go ahead and say that the enemy's weapons are banned, because remember, both sides are subject to these laws. And that's one of those things that I personally really preferred about Tactics Advance, as opposed to the overall better game, I would say, of A2. The law system I actually really, really liked here. Because what they're saying is that, again, it's these arbitrary rules that everybody has to follow, but this means that if, for example, there is an enemy that's a particular threat, you can ban their weapon. Or, for example, you can get around those laws in fun ways. Like, okay, shoot, it is illegal for me to go and use to go and fire a gun today. But it's also illegal for me to go and use swords. right? But technically, firing a sword skill out of a gun is using the Knight Sword command, so technically it is neither of those things. Getting around laws in that way is pretty fun, and also I should point out that it's actually going to judge you based off of the severity of what happened from that rule break. So for example, let's say you use a banned weapon and you end up knocking out an enemy unit that the judge is technically sustaining because you have technically killed them. It's just the legal system keeping them alive. In that context, essentially what they're doing is like, no, 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 they're not dead, and also I'm confiscating that weapon. Now, I should point out that the actual item confiscation thing is super rare. I think I've only ever seen it once over the course of dozens of playthroughs of this game, so it's not something you run into all the time. But it is technically something that can happen. Anyway, so getting back to it though, this just really creates this fun dynamic where it feels like the law is kind of adjusting to the things that you're doing. It does feel like the judge is trying to judge. Like if you have multiple tiny infractions for like, okay, look, you were supposed to not recover health today, you used first aid to get rid of poison, and technically, you also gain a little bit of health. Yellow card, you're gonna, let's say, earn a little bit less experience, or you're gonna earn less JP for that fight, or something like that. And you potentially can stack up multiple tiny infractions. But if you end up getting a severe infraction, a red card, like you'll notice that yellow and red card counter at the bottom, you'll end up getting that added, you'll end up getting that unit arrested. If Marsh is arrested, your game is over. If anybody else is arrested, you can go and bail them out of jail. And additionally, you would have to pay fines to get them out of there and all of that kind of thing. But again, it's a really cool kind of fleshed out system there, where again, it judges you based off the severity of things, and depending on how many minor infractions you've built up, from what I understand, it is going to be more severe with your punishments if you're going and repeatedly skirting the law like that. So it's just kind of fun. Additionally, they also added this combo system in this game, wherein if you have certain weapons, you can do an unavoidable team-up attack by multiple units, where as soon as you get a kill, all those units are able to team up to just go do this fancy unavoidable attack that's basically a basic attack from every one of those units. It's just a fancy gang-up attack, but it, potentially can get around evasion and stuff like that, so it's nice. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that they did with skills here. Additionally, actually, with skills and equipment, I really love what they did here. Because with the skills and equipment, the way that it works is you don't simply go and buy your skills, and you don't simply have your skills. Instead, when you're training with a new piece of equipment, you end up getting a skill temporarily, which you can then use until you fully master it. So for example, like right now, Marsh is using a short sword that gives him the first aid skill. And so, after a couple of battles, he'll end up having learned that first aid skill temporarily. But if he didn't, like let's say you get a skill, you don't like it, you don't have to learn it. You can just abandon it. But this creates this thing where you don't always want to go for necessarily the best weapon. It might instead be more beneficial to go and train particular skills, to go and unlock classes faster, or to, potentially you might put a class on the shelf because there's nothing new for you to learn there. And that dynamic is really fun to me. Because it means that a new weapon isn't simply thrown in the trash because its stats aren't good enough. It might be a skill that you never would have used otherwise, Also, this guy must have had one hell of a record or something, because he just immediately gets a red card for using a potion. You would have to do that a few times to get it to happen to you. But anyway. So yeah, there's that. Now, again, as far as that the skill system goes, this also means that a lot of the best skills in the game require you to use objectively terrible weapons. Like the Seventh Heaven is this funky-looking kind of over-decorated bow that gives you the Ultima Shot ability, and that thing takes I think it was 900 points to actually learn, which is effectively the equivalent of 18 battles. But once you use it, now you have this really good ability that's able to be used with any weapon that you'd like. Anyway, the ways that you can use these different skills to skirt around laws, or to get around different types of defenses, or whatever else, really add a lot of layers to the combat here that I really enjoy. Now, I'm giving you a lot of the positives here. There are definitely negatives. Like, for example, the Blue Mage has so many cool mechanics, and they basically don't introduce it. But again, the skill system is just really damn cool, where, again, it just kind of gives you this feeling that you're actively learning your stuff instead of simply arbitrarily buying it from a shop or whatnot. And additionally, it's kind of cool to have this mission structure where you have to go and take contracts, and basically stuff happens from those contracts. It also allows for some cool theming in a lot of places, and it allows you to actually use items to add modifiers to your engagements. So, for example, let's say there's a mission early on where you're given a sprinkler as a prize, and then a little bit after, you're given a mission in which you are dealing with several bomb enemies that are setting fire to a town. And really, it's just a matter of just going and fighting them, but the framing of the whole thing is that you're going and you're fighting these bomb enemies that are going to burn the place down. But you can deploy those sprinklers for that fight to give you a big advantage in terms of nullifying their fire attack, and improving your personal ice attacks and things like that. So it's cool. You know, it's cool to have that kind of ability to modify your stuff. And this is even before getting the fact that you actually will create the world map as you go. So every time you get a new area, you can go ahead and put it next to something else, and it might give you, it might potentially shake and give you a rare item early. So maybe you just want to build a big city district somewhere, or maybe you want to build a kind of nature area over here. You can potentially use this to cheese away missions and such. And again, it's one of many things that's just kind of cool. You know, you're filling out the world map as you go along. Very Legend of Mana of them. But anyways, this cool skill system means that you basically don't have to wait for points or grind or whatever else, that you can just go and pick up your favorite skills right away, and then go and essentially transfer them to who you'd like. You can have your builds planned out through equipment. You can pre-buy those skills from that equipment. It feels really nice. So I really like that. Now, I mentioned earlier how those judges were somehow related to permadeath, and I just noticed I never finished explaining that. So when a character gets knocked out, they're not really just knocked out, right? They actually will instead just kind of be on the ground for a little bit, but they don't have an actual bleed out timer. So you notice how I mentioned earlier that the actual mechanics of the game say that it's the judges that are preventing death, right? So what does a kid in kind of the inner city there potentially think happens if they go to the ghetto? They think they've basically been told, probably by the news, probably by their parents, whatever else, that there's no law there, right? So if you go to the ghetto towns in this place, aka the Jads, they're the towns that have a little skull over them. If any of your people in your team are laying on the ground at the end of the fight, they're dead. They're not coming back. They are permanently dead right then and there, no questions asked. It is exactly as abrupt as you think it is. And it's basically there to send that message of like, yeah, no, it's not that death doesn't exist in this world because it is stupid little kids game. It's because it is this legal system keeping them alive. It's this thing that everyone is a slave to, that everyone has to go and obey in order to, you know, try and keep themselves alive. Like, as soon as they disobey, you know, now they're suddenly, you know, as soon as they try to escape this legal binding there, now suddenly they're subject to death at any time, which also means every time that you're doing fights in those areas, you know exactly what you did. So again, it's oftentimes underrated in terms of its actual world building, because there's a lot of stuff like this, and everywhere you turn, there's just gonna be cool new little kind of fleshing outs of the world and whatnot. You see other groups like yourself that are constantly traveling around and going and taking territory and what have you, and eventually you'll end up beating all of them. Personally, one of those disappointments for me was the fact that those parties didn't scale with you, so you do eventually end up just kind of curb stomping them. But either way, it's just a really cool setting. I really like it. I think it's extremely underrated, that it gets panned so dang often for like, oh, it's just a dumb kids game, when it really does have more going for it than it gets credit for. Let's see, Protect is currently banned by going here. Oh no, what are we possibly going to do by not being able to not use that ability we don't have? And bear in mind again that even before you get law cards, this doesn't mean that you can specifically travel around the map to make sure that enemy units are banned from, let's say, using a particular element that they would be really strong with or whatnot. Sure, there's going to be some situations where, you know, there are exceptions carved out where, you know, the friggin' gods of this universe aren't exactly going to suddenly decide not to attack you because, you know, technically they're not supposed to that day. But there are a lot of cases where you can screw over anybody that is subject to the laws, and it's just a really, again, just a fun mechanic, fun little way to frame everything. And it feels like every dang mission in this one is that same way. That there's an interesting exploration put in place over kind of how this weird universe might potentially function, your place in it, and whatever else. So again, to my mind, it's extremely underrated. I really love it. I would really recommend giving it a shot at some point if you haven't already. And if you have tried it already, if you haven't played it since you were a kid, please give it another shot. Try and look for those darker edges to this particular game, because there is a lot more to it. Remember again that there's a lot of weird stuff that's simply there seemingly for the sake of sending a message. Like for example, there's one mission that you take early on, or not even early on. I think it's technically around mid game. Where they say, hey, look, there's just a bunch of people disappearing in this one spot over here. Like, we don't know what the deal is. We just want somebody to go send their clan out to go, to figure out what the hell's going on. And you get there, and there's just a single Tonberry holding its knife out. So yes, they sent a bunch of children to go apprehend the serial killer. It's such a weird universe that I personally really appreciate. Anyways, so with that being said, that is kind of more or less going to cover it for this one. I could go on about this one for hours, but I think I've gone about as long as anybody's willing to listen to for this particular side of it. So we should move on to FFTA 2 at this point. Just please give it a try. It really does hold up better than you might think. And also, for those that are really, really upset about the law thing and would like to use the FFTA 2 law system, which we'll get to in just a second here, know that there is a mod out there called Grim Grimoire. I meant to cover it this week. I haven't really finished getting that far in it. It's still got a lot of rougher, kind of moddy edges on it, but it does do a lot of cool stuff there, so maybe give that a shot. It might be what you're looking for. Anyway, so let's go over to A2 now. And then we get to Tactics A2 Grimoire of the Rift, aka we go back to same book now, please. So this is a direct sequel to A2, and it does so much good, like, game feel type of stuff here. Like, this is one of the chillest games that you will ever play. And again, ignore the game feel, or ignore the kind of overall kiddie framing of the whole thing, because just like the previous one, it does actually have a lot more kind of going on there than it may initially seem. In fact, it's really funny that they go for this whole kiddie theme here, when in reality you spend most of the game basically dealing with a cartel. So there's that. But to me, this whole story of this game and its world and whatever else is a story of kind of exploring exploitation in a perfect world. Exploring what may happen in a case where, there really is no scarcity. That the place has basically been cleansed of the stuff that was messed up in the previous game. So now that there's no one like doing crazy leader stuff with the world there, like, what happened? Like, what happened to the old world there? Is it still in the book? Is it still what? And we actually find out that Mute, aka Mr. Randell in this case, has grown up. He's gone and he's become a teacher. He's gotten his shit sorted out, so to speak. And now we are playing as one of his students, Mr. Clements over here. Now, in his case, he doesn't exactly have a tragic background or anything else, but instead he's actually he's more or less a bit of a class goofball. He actually reminds me of my son in many ways, but essentially he's the prankster who's got more potential than he's gonna let on. He's gonna actively sabotage himself because it's funny, that kind of stuff, and yeah, so he's more than willing to cause chaos just for the hell of it, and it's essentially it seems like the teachers here realize that for whatever reason, Mr. Randell here is capable of kind of whipping students into shape, but they don't seem to elaborate on how. So they send him to his library to potentially go and serve his his sentence here with his detention. He got himself detention right before the end of school, and filled out his summer homework there, saying that he's going to spend the entire summer lazing off. Interestingly enough, the actual bonuses you get do change depending on the stuff that you choose at the start. I forget if his stats specifically change, but the bonuses bonuses that you get from the judges do actually change. The order that you unlock stuff changes based off of your choices, which is kind of a cool choice. Additionally, I want to point out that that screen on the left, that would normally be the top part of the DS, actually fills out as the game progresses with kind of different figurines and stuff of stuff that you've run into along the way. And it's just really cool. It's really neat. Also here, let me just check the video is working just fine. So anyways, he reads through this book, and this neat book says, hey, look, someone's supposed to fill these barren pages. Do you happen to know this person's name? Like, well, what's with all the backwards words? Well, I never pass up a chance to write in a library book. So he writes in the magic book and decides that he needs to fill out its pages. And so that is more or less the job that he's stuck with over the course of this story. That he's given a journal to fill out with things that he more or less learned. Because remember, this place is still functionally owned by Mute from the last game. But he has grown up. He has learned and he has become an adult. And now has a more functional use for this little pocket dimension that he's got. In which he seemingly just kind of sends kids in here to go learn to stop being assholes. Now, that thing would be... This is something that feels like it was very clearly written by a parent. But anyway, like, oh shoot, I can just send my kid in there and have them learn lessons? Amazing. So, anyway, immediately he gets sent into this universe, and what happens? He almost gets killed by a chicken. And again, another kind of interesting note here is pay attention to the stuff that Sid here says. Where he says, okay, look, like, if you join us, you become immortal. The judge system is still active here. Death is still possible in this book world here. However, people only can die if they are not, currently employed by the system, so to speak. But people have made peace with the system, so effectively everyone just kind of goes along with it. So most folks can become immortal and just kind of do whatever the hell they feel like. They've actually created that sort of a better, perfect world here where everything is just organized, but it's not chaos. And so to that end, he essentially swears fealty to this guy immediately. And immediately his response is, well, I can't die anyway, so I should just go do whatever. At which point he's put into his place and told, you know what? You may not be able to die, but you may just basically get an eye pecked out and wish that you did. So, interesting first notes for allegedly a kid's game here. Anyway, again, a cool setting, cool overall gameplay and everything. They do a lot of really neat stuff with the mechanics here. Like, mechanically speaking, this game is such an absolute treat. Like, we've got the law system coming back, but effectively it is a bonus system here. So anyway, So, the way that the law system works this time around is that you pick a bonus, essentially a buff to your team of various different types that you get at the very start. Most of the time, folks will probably go for the JP boost, but whatever. And it allows you to gain an edge during that fight, but as soon as you break the laws, your units are able to get knocked out. Once they get knocked out, though, they can't... Well, they're always able to get knocked out, but you can't revive anymore once you break the law for that particular round, meaning that they're effectively thrown into jail and pulled away from the fight and forced to lose, give or take. But as long as you follow... Like, you can go and directly break the laws. Nobody's going to be going to jail for it. They did away with the jail system this time around. And again, everything about it screams like... Basically, Mute learned from what happened in the first game to create a place that's actually beneficial for people to go to. And I love that as a framing device, that it just feels like the world grew up, you know? That it's no longer this chaotic situation that's made from the mind of a child, that it feels, again, it feels organized. It feels like everything has a very direct purpose. And in this case, when you're going and exploring these different locations, you'll often find, like, there's going to be potentially hidden objectives and fights. There's going to be little hidden paths that unlock new missions and stuff like that every now and then. You'll have missions that are, for example, like a chef needs a particular amount of a particular monster, and so you run into a field with infinite monsters, just more or less trying to solve this basic math problem in what would more or less be a kind of chaotic, gigantic fight in any other situation. You can't win that fight, you have to win the puzzle, and the amount of puzzle fights in this game is just glorious. Like, there's an entire little side quest where you're going and escorting a news reporter who is a complete and utter jackass. And every situation that he gets into, he almost gets himself killed. But that's, again, the kind of fun of that whole situation. Or you've got a lot of fun clans that are going around being your rivals, serving in tournaments like they did in the previous one. But additionally, you'll see them popping up in story events to pop out and help out every now and then. You'll see them, for example, taking part in kind of direct fights with you. In some cases, they're going to be kind of blatantly overpowered stuff, and they're giving you interesting challenges. Like, I think the Five King Sinclair here is one of the coolest side quests in anything of the genre, where it's 5 completely maxed out characters of the different colored wizard classes, and you fight them one at a time. And early on, they're like, okay, one unit. It's a 5v1. We just need you to, just kind of fight this dude. Just, he wants to have a little bit of a test, see how you're doing. And so you show up to the fight, one blue mage. What the hell is this guy gonna do? Dude shows up and just, like, wipes your entire team in a single turn. And then you realize this was not a supposed to lose fight. You get a loss for that one, and you suddenly see it pop back up on the board. Like, no. You're supposed to be able to win that. Figuring out how to win that scenario where you've been, like, quadruple one-shot for your entire team, that's intended design. Like, you are going to learn some mechanics to figure this out. And the way that it leans into just exploring every bit of the mechanics of this one screams like they knew that this is the last hurrah of these particular types of games. They knew there was not going to be an Advanced 3. But if you ever were one of those that said that this was too much of a kiddie game, that, it was just too easy for your big meaty brain, turn on hard mode, go and re-explore this thing, do the side content and all of that, and you'll find a real treat of a game here. The downside is, of course, that it's pretty darn expensive to actually get it on original hardware at this point. Like, I had ended up handing my copy to a friend a while ago, who ended up sending a message. I forget what the exact wording was, but it was something to the tune of, like, do you know how much this is actually worth? I'm like, no. I just want you to go play the game. It's awesome. Like, yeah, just don't look it up then. So, but yeah, no, like, these, man. Yeah, this game's gotten friggin' expensive over the years just because of how rare it was. So it's one of those cases where I really, really wish that when they do the Final Fantasy Tactics Remaster, I hope they package in Tactics Advance and Advance 2, because these games are wonderful. They're incredible games, and they really deserve to be loved. And it's just a real shame to me that oftentimes you'll see the argument like, "No, guys, the original is superior because politics. There isn't enough classism in my game." Like, dude, there's plenty of classism here. It looks happier. Chill out. It's okay. It doesn't have to be grimdark for you to enjoy it. You can grow up to not need to prove that you've grown up that hard. It's okay. Oh man. Anyway, so yeah, that's kind of A2 in a nutshell. Just like the previous one, you're doing a lot of missions. You've got a lot of fun character moments that happened between all of your characters. But anyway, it's a very very chill game. It's a very just fun game to play through. Mechanically speaking, everything from like the different battles, types of battles you run into, the interesting callbacks to previous games, the cool way, for example, some of the clans will go and interact with each other is just really neat. Like, you have two of them that are basically just having a race war the entire time, and you're constantly getting stuck in the middle of it in interesting ways. It's actually really cool that you can actually send out your generics. This is one of those games that actually did something that almost no games of the genre do, in which you don't need your character. You can bench Luso basically the entire game. You can send out your generics in his place and forget that he exists, and they will have different lines for every unit type. That every kind of race and class combination, I forget exactly how far that extends, but they will have different lines, and they will acknowledge stuff that they've been there for. Like, there was no reason for them to go that hard in it, but they sure did. So yeah, I love that. Like, that is just beautiful. Also, I should probably point out that it depends on your emulation device, but sometimes emulation is a bit harsher than other times for this game. It does not like being emulated. So, again, I really hope they re-release it. But hell, even on top of everything else, the amount of detail that goes into all of the sprite work in the background is exquisite. They put so much work into everything. It's seriously, this thing is just downright art. And anybody that tries to tell me that they're too grown up for it needs to actually stop being 10 years old and grow up. I really, really, really like this game. Anyway, so that's about that. That's all I had time for here today. So I hope this convinced you to experience 1 or 3 of these. They're really, really worth your time. And thank you all for stopping by. Okay, see you next time. Bye.